Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. And today we're going to be looking at a news item that has something to do with Christianity because some of the biblical principles apply to this specific issue. And then I want to talk about a couple other issues related to this one, and it is related to the recent Alabama Supreme Court decision that ruled that the frozen embryos in an IVF or in vitro fertilization clinic are, in fact, human beings and deserve protection under the civil rights laws. So that these embryos have a right to life, they are human persons, and they cannot be just simply discarded. And if they are discarded, there have to be some kind of damages or punishments leveled against the guilty party. So a lot of the liberal, leftist, secular humanists are up in arms about this. They're saying, oh, this is terrible. These embryos are simply too small to count. They're insignificant. They're not important. And from a Christian perspective, we have to say, no, wait a minute, stop, hold up, hold on. If you think about it, these frozen embryos are actually human persons. And I'll explain why they are. Now, this can even confuse some Christians. Some Christians look at this news and say, well, that's too far. That's gone too extreme. That's on the extreme fringe of an opinion. And what they're basically doing is going along with the culture. They're going along with the culture of death. They're going along with the secular humanistic ethic that the only people that count are the ones that you can count, or the only ones that are any significance are the ones with a voice or someone who can demonstrate or march or protest, and those are the only ones that deserve life. No, the Judeo-Christian ethic is that all human beings are made in the image of God at all stages of development. So you could be a 1-month-old baby in the womb, or you can be a 1-year-old baby born outside of the womb, or you can be a 101-year-old senior citizen at the end of your life. And everyone deserves the right to life because they're born, and they have not just born, or it doesn't matter if they're not even born yet, they're in the womb. They have a right to life because they're made in the image of God. They're created in the image of God. And so you have to look at this whole timeline from the moment of conception to the moment of death. And if you're a human being, you deserve equal treatment as every other human being. And the only justification for the taking of a human life is if that person did something heinous like a murder or some such crime like that, and then they may be punished by capital punishment, which is also outlined in the Bible, Genesis again, and the early chapters of the Bible talk about that if you take a human life, your life shall be taken. Unjustified killing of an innocent human being is deserving of death. That's capital punishment. That is justified, but you just simply can't kill another human being, an innocent human being, without justification, without good justification, without a righteous reason why that death occurs. Now, sometimes in war, there are deaths that occur when one nation faces off against another nation. For example, during World War II, we sent troops over to England and we sent troops over to Europe, and we killed Germans. Why? Because Germans were under the power and spell of a demonic possessed person called Adolf Hitler, and his Nazi party was destroying all of Europe and would have taken over the entire world if someone had not stopped him. And so we had to do that. Our cause was just, it was righteous, and we killed Germans because they were fighting for the wrong cause. Those were justified killings, but you cannot kill a baby in the womb, an innocent baby, a human person in the womb, because that's not justified. You are taking the life of an innocent person, and so this is wrong. Now, the rub here is that a lot of people operate on the basis of their feelings and emotions and their perceptions. And they say, well, an embryo, a human embryo, certainly is not worthy of life because they haven't even been born yet. So, but you're talking about a stage of development. They haven't developed yet. They haven't reached a certain milestone. And what is that milestone? Some people say, well, it's birth. So anyone who has not been born yet, you can be 8 months and just a few minutes from birth, and then you can have a doctor kill the baby in the womb through abortion, and that's justified? What is the difference between that human life a few minutes before birth and a few minutes after birth? So you're getting arbitrary when you start making lines of demarcation like birth. And so this is inconsistent. It doesn't make sense. It can be easily refuted. And so other people say, well, maybe it's in the womb someplace when the child begins to kick and move about, so-called, in the old days, quickening, when the baby was of sufficient stage of development, when the baby could be felt by the mother. And that was the quickening. And so that would be the stage that the baby becomes a life that's worthy of protection. Well, again, that's arbitrary. Just because a baby is able to kick stronger at a certain stage, and then what about a day before that stage when the baby is not kicking? It's not worth anymore because it's kicking or it's not kicking. Again, arbitrary, easily refuted, simply an arbitrary line of demarcation to make humans feel somewhat justified in their decision making, but it makes no sense biologically. If you go to a biological textbook and you look in, when does a human being start becoming a human being? And the textbooks will say human life begins at conception. So that's the only logical, rational, reasonable, biological reason why anyone would have any start, and that is conception. Anything else is arbitrary. Any other point of development is arbitrary. And so as Christians, we fight very strongly for that line of defense to say, look, from the moment of conception onward, this is a human being. So the case in Alabama was that there was an in vitro fertilization clinic that had said that it will treat a couple who could not give birth to children, could not conceive, and they would then go through the IVF procedure, and then there would be some frozen human embryos, and they would preserve those frozen embryos as long as the parents wanted them. And somehow, some way, there was a mistake in the laboratory, and someone let those frozen embryos thaw out, and it destroyed them and killed them. And then the couple came back and sued the clinic and said, look, you promised, you said, you guaranteed that these would be preserved, the embryos, and that's the fertilized eggs. And they were not. So we're entitled to compensation because this is a crime. You essentially killed some small human embryos. And it went all the way to the Alabama Supreme Court, and the court ruled, according to the state of Alabama, that those human embryos are persons and those deserve protection, and that there will be some kind of punishment or fine or compensation to the parents. And the leftist liberals, the secular humanist, the culture of death is up in arms because, oh, this is outrageous. How could a court rule such a way? And the pro-life Christians have always said, well, it's very logical. That it makes perfect sense. These human embryos are human. They're human beings. They are classified in the same category as everyone else. Now, they're not as big. They're not as developed. They're not as visible. They don't have the ability to fight for their rights or advocate for human rights at all. And so they're totally dependent on people, adults, sane, humane people to speak up for them and say, hey, they deserve the right to life also. So as Christians, we applaud the Alabama Supreme Court decision, and we say to every state, actually, that you need to also protect human embryos because they're not just clumps of cell. They're not just to be experimented with. That's another issue I want to talk about a little bit briefly, and that is embryonic stem cell research. This has been going on for many, many years, many decades, in fact, the controversy around embryonic stem cells. It's basically the same situation, only scientists in the medical field have said, well, we need these human embryonic stem cells that are obtained by taking apart human embryos, and we need them for medical research. We need them for procedures to help people regain brain function, and so on and so forth. So these are very important for us in research, and so they use embryonic stem cells. They use human embryos that have been frozen or that have been preserved from IVF clinics and so on and so forth, and they use them in research. And again, the pro-life Christian position is no, you are tampering with and experimenting with and using humans as simply guinea pigs in a laboratory research project, and that is inhumane. You cannot use these stem cells because they're human embryonic stem cells. Just as you would not use fetal material, say, of an 8 or 9 month old baby about to be born, or just as you would not use 1 or 2 week old born babies for experimental purposes by removing their parts from their bodies and bringing them into the lab and using them for even treatment of adults or humans that are older than the babies 1 or 2 weeks old. You would not use human beings in such a way. You're using them as body parts. You're using them in research, and you're using them as lab rats. And this is not fitting for people created, made in the image of God. Every person, every human being is made in the image of God. That's what Genesis, the early chapters, speak about, that God created them, male and female. In his image, he created them, male and female. And so every human being deserves the right to life, and that's a God-given right. We even have that in our Constitution, even though Jefferson and Franklin and Washington and some of the others were not strictly biblical Christians. They did have a semi-Christian worldview. They recognized that God gave human rights. That's where human rights come from. They don't come from the state. The state doesn't make up human rights and then confer them on humans. God gives the humans their human rights, and then the state recognizes that and enforces that and punishes those who do not recognize that. So the state is there to preserve human life and to protect the rights of human beings. So we insist that the U.S. government uphold the human rights of human beings at all levels. So the baby in the womb, we're against abortion. We don't believe that anyone has the right to kill an innocent human being in the womb through abortion. And we don't believe that anyone has a right to experiment on human embryos. That's right, they're human embryos. They're human persons. They're human beings. They have a unique DNA pattern, just like every human being has a unique DNA pattern. And scientists can look at those human embryos and tell that that's a human being, as opposed to a snail or a whale or a dog or a cat or a monkey or a fish. Each species has its own unique DNA, and those human embryos have the human DNA within them, and scientists can tell that they are human beings. And so they deserve a right to life. They deserve a right and the dignity of their rights to be protected by the governing authorities, the government. And so we're opposed to abortion. We're opposed to human stem cell research. And another thing that flows from that is that we are against the in vitro fertilization if the couple decides to fertilize more than just one egg. So here's what usually happens in an in vitro fertilization clinic. They say, well, we need to have you come in, and then the male sperm is going to fertilize a number of female eggs, and it could be 5, it could be 10, and they're all going to be fertilized, and then the healthiest of these fertilized eggs is going to be reimplanted in the woman's womb, and then she gives birth 9 months later, and then that's their child. Well, the problem with that is, what about the 9 human embryos that were not selected to be reimplanted in the womb of the woman? What about them? What happens to them? They're human beings. They're made in the image of God. They've been conceived. The male sperm and the woman's egg have conceived a child, and now it has its own unique DNA. So what do you do with that? Well, in the case of the Alabama couple, they had those frozen, and they were going to either implant them again in the mother's womb, or they were going to not kill them because they believe that they're made in the image of God. Now, the problem with that is you shouldn't fertilize more eggs than you can work with at one time. So if you're trying to conceive and a couple comes in and says, we'd like to use in vitro fertilization because we're having trouble conceiving a child, and so the doctor says, okay, come on in, and we're going to fertilize 5 to 10 eggs and then select the healthiest and implant that. And then they say, well, stop, wait, we only want one of them fertilized because we don't want human beings, human embryos, simply in limbo. We don't want them frozen in a refrigerator somewhere, just sitting there. That is undignified. We want one egg implanted in the mother's womb, and we want to give birth to one child, or 2 possibly, in the case of twins or something like that, but not have these extra fertilized human eggs, which are extra human embryos. We don't want that. That is immoral. It's not proper. It's not right. And so if the couple could somehow work out with the clinic that they would only fertilize one egg and then implant that one egg, then that would be acceptable, I guess, in so far as not violating human rights. But what happens at these in vitro fertilization clinics, IVF clinics, is that they, of course, fertilize more. That's the standard procedure, and that is wrong. And so that's why it's not proper for Christians to have all of these embryos fertilized and created, and then to not deal with 9 out of 10 of them and only have one implanted, because that is an undignified situation. So we're opposed to any kind of medical technology that would dehumanize a person or would make them subhuman or not important or imply that they're not worthy of life, because that is playing God. We don't want to play God. God has already revealed. It would be better to not even go to the in vitro fertilization clinic and to not have this whole process take place than to go and generate 5 to 10 or even more human embryos, human persons with their own unique DNA, and then just leave them in limbo or discard them. It would be even worse. So it would be better to not even go through this whole procedure and just trust the providence of God. And that's what a lot of Christian couples do. If they cannot conceive on their own, they're aware of these technologies, but they say, well, look, let's just trust the providence of God. Perhaps, maybe, God will bring about a situation like, for example, Elizabeth and John the Baptist, or Sarah and Abraham, where in their older age they conceived, and it was a miracle. It was God's hand clearly upon them. So it's not unheard of for older women in their 40s and 50s to conceive at times. So God can do those kind of things, or if it takes a miracle, even that. But to go into a in vitro fertilization clinic and deliberately and consciously conceive of 10 humans and then discard 9 of them and take one of them, the healthiest, so-called healthiest, that's not proper. It's not moral. It's not in accordance with the image of God. It does not reflect the image of God in each of them. And it's something that should not be practiced. And especially the experimentation on these embryos should not take place. It's immoral to do that. It's improper to do that, because then you're even going further. Instead of just having them perish, which is wrong, which is a crime, you're actually taking their body parts and using them, their components, in medical research and medical treatment. You're using them as a means to an end. You're just treating them as if they're a utilitarian usefulness. And that is dehumanizing. And so Christians have a very clear-cut case. And now some people might say, well, how do you know that the embryos and the babies in the womb before they're born, how do you know if they have a soul? Well, we know that. We can deduce that from the scriptures. Again, for example, in the Gospels, it says when Mary went to visit Elizabeth, Mary was pregnant with Jesus, and Elizabeth was with John the Baptist pregnant. And when Mary appeared and came into the room with Elizabeth, it says the babe in Elizabeth's womb leapt. It moved, it quickened, it started kicking, it responded. In other words, the implication is that it responded to the presence of Jesus Christ, the Savior, in the womb of Mary. And that shows that that human life, that person in the womb of Elizabeth, was sensitive enough. And what was sensitive? The spirit of John the Baptist in his little body developing was sensitive enough to know that this was the Lord and Savior, in the presence of the Lord and Savior in the womb of Mary. And so it shows you, it gives you a hint, it gives you a clue that, yes, there is a spirit, there's a soul in the babies in the womb, which is another strong argument against abortion. So all of this ties together. All of it makes sense if you look at the moment of conception, when the human male sperm it penetrates the egg of the woman and conceives a child in the womb. That's the moment when human life begins. There is no other consistent demarcation. It's at that moment that the unique human person is created. And it's that moment, as Christians, we believe that not only is the biological reality of human life present, but the spiritual reality of human life becomes into existence. Because before that, you simply have the woman's egg, and that is not a unique human person. That does not have the different DNA. And then you have the sperm, and that does not have the unique human DNA. But you put them together, and all of a sudden there is a new human being created and conceived, and that is why this person deserves the dignity and the protections of human life. And so it's a very consistent ethic. It's a very consistent moral standard. And this is why, for example, in the argument of abortion, there are no exceptions to abortion in the cases of rape or incest, because in the case of rape, there was a crime committed against the woman by a perpetrator, by the rapist, and a child is conceived. But that child has done nothing wrong. That child is the innocent bystander. That child is the innocent victim. And so that innocent child in the womb, that human person that came into existence through this crime, is innocent but still deserves life and does not deserve to be killed. You don't take the life of the innocent human created in the womb of the woman as a result of rape and kill that human being because of the crime of the father and the one who impregnated the woman. You don't punish the victim, the innocent victim of the crime. And so this makes no sense. So it's a tragic situation. We need to stiffen the penalties for rape. We need to get tough on criminals. We need to make sure that if you do such a terrible crime, you will lose your freedom, you will lose your liberty, and you may get locked up for your whole life in jail, or even the death penalty even. So it's a very serious crime, and we need to treat it seriously, but not kill the innocent conceived child in the womb. So it makes no sense to take out the crime on the innocent child in the womb. Makes no sense at all under any moral system. Also, in the case of incest, if there's some incestuous relationship between, say, the father and a daughter, and there's conception, again, you do not punish the innocent child in the womb. Not the child's fault. It's not the baby in the womb. It's not their fault that they were conceived through a crime, through immoral activity, and they deserve the right to die. Now, a right to life. Excuse me. They don't deserve the right to. They don't deserve to die. They deserve the right to life. And again, there should be stiff punishments for that criminal offense. These people need to be set as an example of what happens if you do something as terrible as that. You deserve to go away for a lifetime, or even worse, the death penalty. But you don't kill the baby in the womb. And if you want to argue that you should be able to, in the case of rape and incest, it's an emotional argument. It's an argument of feeling. It's emotional, touchy-feely, based on more of the reaction against what happened than the sober evaluation of justice. It's not just. It's not fair to the child. That child should not die for the crimes of the father. And so, and as Christians, we have the stronger argument. We need to put that out there. A lot of Republican politicians are wishy-washy on this. They don't want to get into it. And so they just sort of backpedal. They double talk. They try to avoid it. They even compromise. We saw recently this politician in Arizona, Carrie Lake, who's running for Senate. She's now becoming pro-abortion. She thinks that women should have the right to choose whether to kill their baby. And she definitely feels that if it's rape or incest, that it shouldn't be a problem. Just kill that baby, kill that child, kill that innocent victim. No, this makes no sense. This is the culture of death. So we have no reason to be wishy-washy. We have no reason to compromise. We have a stronger moral argument. So let's make it. Let's make that strong moral argument. And as Christians, we can't fall into the same trap of getting wishy-washy, emotional, and making the touchy-feely arguments, or falling in line with the popular, secular culture of death side. We need to stand strong and say, well, no, according to the Bible, everyone is made in the image of God. All human beings deserve life, and they don't deserve to have their life taken. And so that's why we defend human life at all stages, young, old, the very ends, the very extreme ends of young, very extreme end of old. We also oppose the euthanasia and the so-called mercy killings and the so-called doctor-assisted suicide. And we oppose all of that because we see that that also is treating human beings less than what the Bible describes in a dignified manner. And we need to oppose all of those attempts to rob human dignity of the way it is described in the Bible. So I hope that's been a clarification. I hope that makes sense. And we will see you back next time, next week. God bless.